I'm not alone, not alone, I'm not alone, not alone, I'm not alone, not alone, I'm 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 not alone, not alone, I'm 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 not alone. I'm not alone, 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 I'm not alone. I forgot for a minute who I belong to. Mama Earth, the wind and rain, beauty and pain. I'm not alone. For me, the world was created, not alone. Dust I will return. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Not alone. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. As we enter this new year, this Rosh Hashanah, we may be carrying a lot. I suspect all of us are carrying a lot. Such a challenging time. America, Israel, Gaza, world. I'll say more about some of that tomorrow. But tonight, as we stand before these open gates, I want to consider less this country, that country, the entire world. Tonight, I want to focus on you, on us. The tune I was just singing is from Aly Halpert's 2022 album, Loosen. The title track reminds listeners you don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. But many of us, I think, are doing exactly that these days. It's hard not to when there's so much pain. So important. That even as we try not to be crushed under the weight of it all, we are also reminded that none of us is alone. This house of the people, this Beit Am, is a place of sacred gathering. As Yeshayahu, Isaiah the prophet, writes, Ki veti beit tefillah yikarei lechol ha'amim. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. This is our house, all of ours. We're not alone. But Rabbi Yossi in the Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, expands the circle even further. He notices that the first part of the verse reads, Ve'haviotim el har kodshi, V'simachtim bevet tfilati. I will bring them to my sacred mount and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Yes, you could read this, my house of prayer, but you could also translate it, house of my prayer. And Rabbi Yossi's radical claim is the following: God prays too. I'm not alone. We're not alone. We, all of us, divine and human, are in this together. I'm not alone. Not alone. I'm not alone. Not alone. I'm not alone. I'm not alone, 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 I'm not alone. I'm not, keep it going. I'm not, I forgot for a minute who I belong to. Mama Earth, the wind and rain, the beauty and the pain. I'm not alone. For me, the world was created. I'm not alone. to dust I will return. I'm not alone, 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 I'm not alone. We belong to each other. After this very, very trying year, when so much feels beyond our control, many of us are fighting for justice where we can, our democracy where we must. But to have the stamina to go forward into another year, we must find ways to claim one another, even as the earth claims us, beauty and pain, all of it, all of creation, on this anniversary of the world's creation, brought together in a great oneness we call God. Halpert's lyrics channel a famous teaching of Reb Simcha Bunem of Pshischa, great Hasidic master, who it's told would carry around with him 2 pieces of paper, one in each of his pockets. And on one piece of paper, it was written, Bishvili nivra olam, the world was created for my sake. And on the other piece of paper, it was written, Anochi afar ve'efer, I am merely dust and ashes. And when he was feeling a little down on himself, sad, unsure of himself, he would take out the piece of paper that read, Bishvili nivra olam, the world was created for me, and it would perk him up. And when he was feeling a little full of himself, like perhaps he was the center of the universe, he would take out the other piece of paper, the one that says, I am only dust and ashes. That would help him find balance once again. These 2 pieces of paper are like the pole of a funambulist, of a tightrope walker. When we lift to one side, we rebalance ourselves so we can stay on the high wire. Or perhaps, as Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav says, the Gesher Tsar Me'od, the very narrow bridge that makes up our life in this world. But Chaver, I want to offer us a reframe on this famous teaching tonight. As we enter the new year of 5786, I want us to consider that these statements may not mean exactly what we think they mean. These are not 2 random phrases, you see, made up by Reb Simcha Bunem in order to keep himself in check. They have deep textual roots. Anochi afar ve'efer. Where does that come from? From Avram Avinu, from Abraham our father, when he is negotiating with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and God is about to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he says, you know what? Maybe I should bring Abraham into this conversation. After all, I've just called him to a certain task, to form this new people, to go to this new land. Maybe I should trust him and bring him into the fold. And Abraham, being understandably horrified, both because he had mashpacha in those towns, but also because he was concerned about what would be unfolding, he negotiates with God. And in the midst of that negotiation, he says to God something incredible, even a little outrageous. He says, Chalila lacha, far be it for you, Maaseh kadavar hazeh, to do something like this. Lehamit tzadik im rasha v'haya chat tzadik karasha, to wipe out the innocent along with the guilty, so that innocent and the guilty fare alike. Chalila lacha hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? And then God says, okay, so if there are 50 righteous people, I will spare the cities. And Avraham, knowing that that was unlikely, it was a pretty bad place, presses his luck. But before he does, he says, Ve'anochi afar ve'efer. I am merely dust and ashes. And then he says, 50? How about 45? He says, I am merely dust and ashes, but what does he mean? He means, even as I humbly submit myself to you, God, I wish to remind you that human life is valuable. And I would very much like for you, God, to honor the sanctity of life. Don't sweep away the innocent with the guilty. Chutzpah. So I am but dust and ashes means humanity and I are actually worth quite a lot. But what about that second phrase? Also, it's not out of nowhere. In fact, it comes not from Torah this time, it comes from Mishnah, from the great 2nd century compendium of Jewish law and legend. And in that discussion in Masechet Sanhedrin, there's a discussion about capital punishment. And what are the circumstances in which capital punishment may be meted out? We're told, you see, that human life is so sacred that the court must be completely sure that any person it executes is guilty of the crime for which they were accused. That's why the rabbis made it so that it happened, these executions actually very, very rarely. Nevertheless, it did occur. Capital punishment is on the books. Then the question is, what should we consider when thinking about meting out the ultimate punishment? The text invokes the first murder. Who was that? Right, Cain kills Abel. And in the context of that murder, God is very upset. And the response to the murder, among other things, is Kol Damei Achicha. The blood of the earth cries out, except that if you do a close reading of the text, you see Kol Damei Achicha, not the blood of the earth, but it could be read the bloods of the earth. And the text in Sanhedrin tells us, that reminds us that when you take a life, rightly or not, justified or not, you are removing not just that person from the planet, but every possible human being who would come from their line. Bloods of the earth. And to drive this home, the text goes on and says, God is like a coin maker. God runs a giant cosmic mint. And in heaven, wherever that is, God is sort of stamping out making human beings. And the amazing thing about God's mint, unlike the treasury still intact? Is that a normal coin maker would take a mint, right, and cast a coin over and over and over again. And guess what happens? Each coin comes out exactly the same as the last. But God stamps from the original, from Adam Harishon, from the very first human being, and yet every single time God does this, each coin comes out unique. Each person not only is the beginning of perhaps an infinite line of other human beings that could come after them, but each one of us, all 8 billion plus people on this planet, each of us are unique. And then comes our line. It says, therefore, each person should say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. We should consider that the world was created, each of us, for our sake alone. Then, the text, having established that each person is unique and of infinite value, the Mishnah closes by reinforcing, maybe paradoxically, the importance of bearing witness in capital cases. It doesn't ban executions. On the contrary, these texts are meant in this context to remind us that should the very high evidentiary threshold actually be met, dafka, because human life is so valuable, the rabbis insist on providing witness in a capital case. And if perhaps you witnesses would say, why should we be guilty of the blood of this man? Was it not said, when the wicked perish, there is rejoicing? My goal here is not to speak on behalf of capital punishment. I'm very glad that we no longer have it in the state of Maryland. The point here is to celebrate the value of human life. And the point of the phrase, "the world was created for my sake," implies that none of us should feel that we are so special as to think that we are better than any other human being. To unjustly take another life is to denigrate God's image, and each of us must ensure that no life is elevated above another. That is not easy. That's the measure against which we're supposed to hold ourselves. So what does it mean to carry these two pieces of paper? What does it mean to calibrate ourselves with these polarities? It means that to remain on the tightrope, the narrow bridge, we must be able to hold not two things, but actually four things at once. We look at ourselves as dust and ashes, not to denigrate the self, but to remind ourselves that all people are of great worth. To say I am unworthy is to remember each person is animated with divine energy, as am I. We should remember the world was created for my sake is not to place ourselves at the center of the universe, but to remind ourselves that this also applies to each and every other person. To say I am worthy is to remember none of us is more worthy. Brilliance of Reb Simcha Bunem's teaching that each piece of paper is in itself in continuous dialogue with the other. In choosing these texts, he offers us a model not of extremes, but of inherent balance, which is to say, we, each of us, are claimed by one another. I am not alone. You are not alone. Each of us exists as projections of something holy, God. Each of us should exist in deep humility, questioning in every moment why my life, my perspective, my experience, my concerns should be more important than any of yours. My friends, I get that many of us do feel lonely. It's a lonely time. Jews, many of us feel quite isolated right now. Human beings living in a world so filled with so much struggle, so much animus, so much malice. Feel lonely just to be a human being. This new year, let me offer us this gentle reminder. I know it feels like you're alone. We are not alone. You're not alone. I'm not alone. Sing it one more time. I'm not alone. Not alone. I'm not alone. Not alone. I'm 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 not. I forgot for a minute who I belong to. I'm not alone. I'm earth. I'm not alone. Wind and rain. I'm not alone. Beauty and pain. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. For me, the world was created. I'm not alone. I'm not to dust. I will return. I'm not alone. Forgot for a minute who I belong to. I'm not alone. Mama Earth, wind and rain, beauty and pain. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. The world was created. I'm not alone. I'm not the dust. I will return. I'm not alone. 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 Shana Tova.